They say Alaska is where people go to disappear. After 32 years as a state trooper, I can tell you that's true. But sometimes it's not people who disappear. Sometimes it's entire places. And sometimes those places come back. If you're watching this from Alaska, drop your location in the comments. I'm curious how many of you have driven through areas where your GPS just stops working, where the radio turns to static, where the temperature drops 20 degrees for no reason. We all know those spots. We just don't talk about them. My name is Trooper Marcus Cole. In February 2021, I found a village that doesn't exist on any map, inhabited by people who shouldn't be alive. The state says it never happened. The FBI classified everything. But I was there. I saw it. And I need someone to know the truth before it happens again. Because it will happen again. Alaska doesn't give up its secrets easily. But when it does, God help whoever finds them. February in Alaska is a special kind of hell. It's not just the cold that gets to you. Though at 40 below, exposed skin freezes in under 5 minutes. It's the darkness. In the far north, where I was stationed, the sun barely scraped the horizon for a few hours each day, casting everything in a perpetual twilight that made you question whether you were awake or trapped in some endless dream. I was based out of Fairbanks, covering a territory roughly the size of Ohio with just me and my Cessna 180 ski plane. That's how it works up here. You can't reach most villages by road, especially in winter. You fly in, handle whatever needs handling, and fly out before the weather turns and traps you for days or weeks. The call came in on February 15th, 2021, at around 2 p.m., though day and night don't mean much when it's dark 20 hours out of 24. Betty at dispatch sounded confused, which was unusual. Betty had been handling emergency calls for 15 years, and nothing rattled her anymore. "Marcus, I've got something weird," she said, and I could hear her typing in the background. "Bush pilot named Tom Reeves called in a mayday about 40 minutes ago, said he was making an emergency landing near a village, but what? The coordinates he gave. There's no village there, nothing on any map. It should be just wilderness, about 80 miles northwest of Arctic Village." I knew that area. Pristine wilderness, mountains and forest and frozen rivers. The nearest settlement was 100 miles in any direction. Maybe he got his coordinates wrong. Happens in whiteout conditions. That's what I thought, but Marcus, he was pretty specific. Said he could see lights, buildings, smoke from chimneys. Said there were people waving at him from the ground. Bush pilots in Alaska are tough as nails. They don't make emergency landings unless something's seriously wrong, and they don't hallucinate villages. If Tom Reeves said he saw a settlement, he saw something. "I'll check it out," I said, already reaching for my flight jacket. "Send me his last known coordinates." The flight from Fairbanks took 3 hours, fighting headwinds and occasional snow squalls that reduced visibility to nothing. The Cessna's engine struggled in the thin, cold air, and ice kept forming on the wings despite the de-icing system working overtime. This is what flying in Alaska really means. Every flight is a calculated risk, a bet that your skill and your machine are better than what the weather wants to do to you. As I approached the coordinates Betty had given me, I saw nothing but wilderness. Mountains covered in snow, forests of black spruce, the occasional frozen river reflecting what little light filtered through the clouds. No village, no lights, no sign of Tom's plane. I was about to circle back when I saw it. A thin column of smoke rising from a valley between 2 peaks. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant people. But according to every map, every satellite image, every survey of this area, there was nothing down there. I circled lower, fighting turbulence as the mountains channeled the wind into unpredictable gusts. And then I saw it, and my hands nearly slipped off the controls. There was a village, Not just a few cabins or a hunting camp, but an actual village. Maybe 30 buildings arranged along what looked like a main street, smoke rising from chimneys, and this is what made me circle 3 times to make sure I wasn't seeing things: electric lights. Actual electric lights in windows, like street lamps that shouldn't exist because there were no power lines for hundreds of miles. I saw Tom's plane first, a red and white Super Cub sitting on what looked like a makeshift airstrip at the edge of the village. It looked intact, no obvious damage. But something was wrong with this picture, and it took me a moment to realize what it was. The village looked old. Not abandoned old, but lived-in old, like it had been there for decades. The buildings were that specific style of architecture you saw in Alaska in the 1940s and 50s. Simple wood construction with steep roofs to shed snow, small windows to conserve heat. But these buildings were in perfect condition, painted and maintained like someone had been taking care of them all along. I landed next to Tom's plane, the skis throwing up clouds of snow as I touched down. The moment I cut the engine, the silence was absolute. No wind, no animal sounds, nothing. Just that perfect, dead silence that makes your ears ring. The temperature gauge read -35, but it felt colder somehow, like the cold here had weight to it. I grabbed my survival pack and rifle. You never go anywhere in Alaska without both, and approached the village. As I got closer, I could see footprints in the snow leading from Tom's plane toward the buildings. Fresh prints, maybe an hour old. But there were other prints too. Lots of them, crisscrossing between buildings like a normal village with normal daily activity. Except this village didn't exist. The first building I reached had a sign above the door: Hilford General Store, Estand 1952. The paint was fresh, maybe a year old at most. Through the window, I could see shelves stocked with goods, everything neat and organized. But the products, they were wrong. The labels, the packaging, everything looked like it was from the 1950s. Not reproductions or vintage items, but actual 1950s products that looked new. "Hello?" I called out, my voice seeming to die just a few feet from my mouth, swallowed by that oppressive silence. "Tom Reeves? Alaska State Troopers. Is anyone here?" A door opened further down the street, and a woman stepped out. She was maybe 40, dressed in a heavy wool coat and dress that looked like something from an old photograph. She smiled and waved, perfectly normal except for the fact that she shouldn't exist in a place that shouldn't exist. "Oh, hello, officer," she called out, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. "Are you looking for the pilot? He's in the town hall with the others. Please, come in out of the cold." Everything about my training told me this was wrong. Every instinct screamed at me to get back in my plane and leave. But Tom Reeves was here somewhere, and I had a job to do. I walked toward the woman, my hand resting on my sidearm. Up close, she looked completely normal. Rosy cheeks from the cold, crow's feet around her eyes, a few gray hairs escaping from under her wool hat. But there was something in her eyes, a quality I couldn't quite identify, like she was looking through me rather than at me. "I'm Martha," she said, extending a mittened hand. "Martha Daniels. Welcome to Hilford." "Hilford doesn't exist," I said bluntly. "This village isn't on any map." She laughed, but it sounded rehearsed, like she'd practiced it. "Oh, we get that a lot. We're a private community. We like our privacy. Please, your friend is waiting." She led me down the main street, past buildings that shouldn't exist, filled with things that belonged in a museum. Everything was clean, well-maintained, perfect. Too perfect. The snow on the street was evenly distributed, no dirty slush or ice patches. The buildings all had icicles of exactly the same length. It was like walking through a movie set, something designed to look like a village but missing all the random imperfections that make a place real. The town hall was in the center of the village, a 2-story building with an actual working clock tower. Inside it was warm, almost hot, heated by a massive wood stove. The interior was all dark wood and old furniture, like stepping back in time. And there, sitting at a long table with about a dozen other people, was Tom Reeves. "Tom?" I called out, relief flooding through me. "You okay?" He turned to look at me, and my relief evaporated. His eyes had that same quality as Martha's, present but not quite there, focused on something beyond what was in front of him. "Oh, hello, Marcus. Yes, I'm fine, just fine. These nice people helped me when my engine failed." "Your engine failed? Tom, you need to come with me. We need to leave." "Leave?" An older man at the head of the table stood up. He was tall, gaunt, with a carefully trimmed beard, and wearing a three-piece suit that belonged in a 1950s boardroom. "But you just arrived. Surely you'll stay for dinner. We so rarely get visitors." "Who are you people?" I demanded. "What is this place?" "I'm Mayor William Thornton," the man said, extending his hand. I didn't take it. "And this is Hilford, as Martha told you. We're just a small community trying to live our lives in peace. Your friend's plane developed engine trouble, and he made an emergency landing. We're happy to help, of course." I looked around the room at the dozen faces staring back at me. Men and women, various ages, all dressed like they'd stepped out of a 1950s photograph. All with that same distant quality in their eyes. All smiling, identical, practiced smiles. "Tom, we're leaving. Now." "I can't," Tom said simply. "My engine won't start. Something's wrong with it. But these nice people say they can fix it. They have a mechanic." "Since when does a village that doesn't exist have an airplane mechanic?" Mayor Thornton's smile never wavered. "We're a resourceful community, Trooper Cole. We've had to be, living out here all these years. Please, sit down. Let us explain." Against my better judgment, I sat, keeping my hand near my weapon. The mayor returned to his seat, and the others continued to stare at me with those empty smiles. "Hilford was founded in 1952, the mayor began, his voice taking on a rehearsed quality like he'd told this story many times. "A group of families seeking to escape the complexities of modern life. We came here, to this valley, and built our community. We've lived here ever since, in peace and isolation." "That's impossible," I said. "This area has been surveyed dozens of times. Satellite imagery, geological surveys, wildlife studies. A village of this size would have been found." "Would it?" the mayor asked, and for just a moment something flickered across his face. Not a smile, not a frown, but something else, something that didn't belong on a human face. "Alaska is vast, Trooper Cole. There are places here that don't want to be found. Places that exist in the spaces between what you call reality." The temperature in the room seemed to drop, despite the roaring fire in the stove. The other people at the table continued to smile, but their smiles were stretching wider, becoming something that wasn't quite right. "What are you?" I whispered. "We're the people of Hilford," the mayor said simply. "We've been the people of Hilford since 1952. We will always be the people of Hilford. And now, so will you." The lights in the room began to flicker, and I realized with growing horror that the electric lights shouldn't be working because there was no power source. The smiles on the faces around me were stretching impossibly wide, revealing too many teeth. And Tom Reeves was smiling too, that same impossible smile, even as his eyes begged for help. I stood up, drawing my weapon. "We're leaving. Now." The mayor stood as well, and he was taller than he should be, his shadow stretching across the ceiling in ways that shadows shouldn't stretch. "I'm afraid that's not possible, Trooper Cole. You see, Hilford needs new residents. We've been the same families for so long, recycling through the same days, the same years. But now you're here. Fresh blood, fresh memories, fresh life to sustain us for another cycle. The lights went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. In that darkness, I heard something that still wakes me up at night. The sound of reality tearing, like fabric ripping but deeper, more fundamental. And then the lights came back on. But the room had changed. The walls were covered in ice, thick layers of it, and frozen inside the ice were people. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all perfectly preserved, all with their eyes open, all wearing clothes from different eras. Some from the 1950s, some from the 1970s, some much more recent. I recognized one face, a Bush pilot who'd gone missing 3 years ago. "Welcome to Hilford," the mayor said, and his voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Population, whoever we need it to be." The human mind has a remarkable ability to rationalize the impossible. When faced with something that shouldn't exist, it tries to find explanations, to fit what it's seeing into established patterns of reality. But standing in that town hall, looking at dozens of frozen people embedded in the walls like insects in amber, my mind simply gave up trying to make sense of it. I kept my weapon trained on Mayor Thornton, though I was increasingly certain that bullets wouldn't do much against whatever he actually was. The other residents of Hilford had stood up from the table and were slowly surrounding me, still wearing those impossible smiles that split their faces in ways that human faces shouldn't split. "What happened to the real Hilford?" I asked, trying to buy time while I figured out what to do. "The real people from 1952? The mayor tilted his head, considering the question. "We are the real people of Hilford. We have always been the people of Hilford. Since the moment this place came into existence, we have been here." "That's not an answer." "Isn't it?" He moved closer, and I could see frost forming on the wooden floor where his feet touched. "Let me tell you a story, Trooper Cole. A true story, though truth is such a flexible concept in places like this." The lights flickered again, and suddenly we weren't in the town hall anymore. We were standing in the same building, but it was different. Older, colder, filled with desperate-looking people huddled around a dying fire. Through the windows, I could see a blizzard raging, the kind of storm that kills anyone caught outside in minutes. "February 15th, 1952, the mayor's voice narrated, though his lips didn't move. "A group of 43 settlers, fleeing something they never quite explained, established Hilford in this valley. They thought they were far enough from civilization to be safe. They thought the isolation would protect them." The scene shifted, and I watched the settlers building their town with a desperate urgency, constantly looking over their shoulders as if something was following them. They worked through the brutal winter, losing fingers and toes to frostbite, but never stopping, never resting. "They built their perfect little town," the mayor continued. "Cut off from the world, self-sufficient, hidden. But isolation in Alaska is never just isolation. The land here is old, older than human memory, and it doesn't like being disturbed." The scene shifted again. The settlers were gathered in this same town hall, fear etched on their faces. Outside, something was circling the village. I could see shapes in the blizzard, massive forms that moved wrong, that had too many angles, that hurt to look at directly. "They made a bargain," the mayor said, and now his voice held something like sadness. "To save their village, to protect themselves from what hunted them, they made a bargain with something that had been sleeping beneath the permafrost for millennia. Something that existed in the spaces between seconds, in the gaps in reality that Alaska is full of." "What did they bargain?" "Their time," he said simply. "They would give up their linear existence, their forward progression through time, in exchange for perfect preservation. Hilford would exist in a bubble, a pocket of 1952 that would last forever. They would never age, never die, never change. The perfect sanctuary. The scene around us shifted back to the present, but now I could see it differently. The two perfect buildings, the two clean snow, the identical smiles. It was all preserved, like a photograph that had somehow become three-dimensional. But there was a cost, I said, understanding beginning to dawn. There's always a cost. The mayor's smile turned genuine for the first time, and somehow that was worse than the false one. To maintain the bubble, to keep the town existing in its pocket of time, we need anchors to the present. Real people from real time. Every few years, someone stumbles upon Hilford. A lost pilot, a hunter, a trooper investigating a missing person. They become part of the preservation, their temporal energy feeding the bubble. I looked at Tom Reeves, who was still sitting at the table, smiling that empty smile. What did you do to him? He's becoming one of us. The process takes about 72 hours. First, the mind adjusts to non-linear time. That's why his eyes look distant. He's seeing all of his moments simultaneously. Then the body begins to synchronize with 1952. Finally, he becomes part of Hilford, part of the preservation, part of the bargain. And the frozen people in the walls? Those who resist, those who won't accept the transition. They're preserved differently, kept as batteries to power the bubble. They're still alive, Trooper Cole, still aware, experiencing every moment of their preservation simultaneously. It's really quite peaceful once you accept it. I backed toward the door, keeping my weapon raised. I'm leaving, and I'm taking Tom with me. I'm afraid that's not possible. The mayor gestured to the windows. Outside, the weather had changed. A blizzard had materialized from nowhere, winds that had to be over 100 miles per hour, snow so thick you couldn't see 3 feet. The town decides who leaves and who stays, and Hilford has decided you're staying. I grabbed Tom's arm, trying to pull him to his feet, but he was impossibly heavy, like he was rooted to the floor. Tom, fight it! Remember who you are! I am Thomas Reeves, he said in a monotone voice. I have always been Thomas Reeves. I have always lived in Hilford. I was born here in 1923. I died here in 1952. I live here now. That doesn't make sense. Time doesn't make sense, the mayor said. Not here. Here, you can be born after you die. You can meet yourself coming and going. You can experience your entire life in a single moment or stretch a second into eternity. That's the beauty of Hilford. We exist outside the tyranny of sequential time. The other residents were closing in, and I noticed their movements were becoming stuttery, like film frames skipping. One moment they were 10 feet away, the next they were 5, with no movement in between. The temperature was dropping rapidly. My breath came out in clouds so thick I could barely see through them. I made a decision that probably saved my life. Instead of trying to fight or reason with them, I pulled out my satellite phone and hit the emergency beacon. It would send my exact coordinates to every emergency service in Alaska, along with a distress signal that would bring helicopters, planes, and search teams. Even if I didn't make it out, someone would know where I was. The mayor's expression changed for the first time to something like concern. What did you do? My job, I said. Even if you keep me here, others will come. They'll find this place. They'll find me. No, the mayor said, and for the first time he sounded afraid. You don't understand. If too many people from the present find Hilford, if too much linear time bleeds in, the bubble will collapse. Everything we've preserved, everyone who's part of the town, will experience all of their time at once. The temporal shock will kill them, kill us, potentially tear a hole in reality itself. Then let us go. The mayor looked at the other residents, and I saw them having a conversation without words, their faces cycling through expressions faster than should be possible. Finally, he turned back to me. A compromise, You can leave. But Thomas Reeves stays. He's already too far into the transition. Removing him now would kill him and damage the bubble. I looked at Tom, sitting there with that vacant smile, and knew I couldn't leave him. No deal. Both of us or neither. Then neither. The mayor raised his hand, and I felt time begin to slow around me. My movements became sluggish, like moving through thick honey. The second hand on my watch slowed, stopped, began moving backward. But then something unexpected happened. My satellite phone, still transmitting its distress signal, began to heat up in my pocket. The modern technology, connected to satellites orbiting in normal time, was fighting against the temporal manipulation. The phone got hotter and hotter until I had to pull it out, and when I did, it was glowing with a white light that made the mayor step back. "Impossible," he breathed. "Technology from your time shouldn't work here." But it was working, and more than that, it was destabilizing something. The walls began to flicker, showing different time periods. The town hall in 1952 and 1970 and 1990, all superimposed on each other. The frozen people in the ice began to move, their mouths opening in silent screams. "Stop!" the mayor shouted. "You'll destroy everything." I held the phone higher, its signal stronger now, pulling more and more of 2021 into this bubble of 1952. The residents of Hilford began to age rapidly, years passing in seconds, their hair going gray, then white, their skin wrinkling, their bodies stooping. Then they'd reset, young again, only to age again in a different pattern. Tom Reeves screamed, a sound that seemed to come from multiple versions of himself at different ages. I saw him as he was, as he would be, as he might have been, all his possibilities existing at once. The mayor lunged at me, moving through time in ways that made my eyes water to follow. One moment he was across the room, the next his hands were around my throat, cold as Arctic ice. But the phone was still transmitting, still anchoring me to 2021, and I managed to press it against his chest. The effect was instantaneous. The mayor screamed and pulled back, his chest smoking where the phone had touched. "You don't know what you're doing. If Hilford falls, if the bubble collapses, the thing beneath the ice will wake. The thing our founders were running from, the thing we've been keeping asleep with our existence." "What thing?" I gasped, struggling to breathe. But before he could answer, the world exploded into chaos. The storm outside intensified beyond anything naturally possible. The building shook, walls cracking, ceiling beams falling. Through the breaking walls, I could see the other buildings of Hilford aging decades in seconds, collapsing into ruin, rebuilding themselves, collapsing again. And beneath it all, beneath the permafrost, something stirred, something vast and ancient and angry. The ground cracked, and through those cracks came a sound. Not a roar, not a scream, but something that bypassed the ears entirely and spoke directly to the primitive parts of the brain that recognized predators in the dark. "Run!" the mayor shouted, and for the first time, he sounded completely human. "Take your friend and run! Get beyond the valley before it fully wakes!" The temporal distortion was breaking down. Tom Reeves suddenly gasped like a drowning man breaking the surface, his eyes focusing on me with desperate clarity. "Marcus? What? Where are we?" "No time to explain." I grabbed him and half-dragged him toward the door. Outside, Hilford was caught in a temporal storm. Buildings aged centuries in seconds. Snow fell upward. The sun rose and set in moments, painting the sky in impossible colors. We ran toward the airstrip, the ground breaking apart behind us. I could feel something massive moving beneath the permafrost, something that had been sleeping since before humans walked the earth. The preservation of Hilford hadn't just been hiding the town. It had been a seal, keeping something trapped. Behind us, the mayor stood in the doorway of the collapsing town hall. "Find the others," he shouted over the chaos. "Find the other villages that don't exist. Warn them. If they fall like we have, if all the seals are broken." But his words were lost as the building collapsed, taking him with it. We reached the plains just as the valley began to fold in on itself. I shoved Tom toward his Super Cub. "Can you fly?" I think so. Marcus, what's happening?" "Just fly. Get above the storm and head for Fairbanks. Don't look back." I jumped into my Cessna, and by some miracle the engine started on the first try. We took off into the chaos, engines screaming, fighting winds that shouldn't exist. Below us, Hilford was disappearing, not just collapsing but being erased, as if it had never existed at all. But just before it vanished completely, I saw something emerge from the collapsed ground. A hand, if you could call it that, made of ice and shadow and angles that hurt to perceive. It was the size of a building, and it was just the fingertip of something much, much larger. Then the valley snapped shut like a closing eye, and Hilford was gone. The storm vanished instantly, leaving us flying in clear, calm air under the aurora borealis. Below us was unmarked wilderness, no sign that anything had ever been there. Tom's voice crackled over the radio. "Marcus, did that really happen?" I looked at my satellite phone. It was dead, completely fried, its screen cracked in a pattern that looked disturbingly like the symbols I'd seen on the mayor's face. But it had saved us. The connection to 2021, to linear time, had been enough to break Hilford's hold. "Yeah, Tom, it happened. What was that thing, under the ground?" I thought about the mayor's final warning, about other villages that don't exist, about seals that keep things trapped. I don't know, but I think Hilford was built on top of it to keep it contained. And we just broke the containment. We flew in silence for a while, both lost in our own thoughts. Then Tom asked the question I'd been dreading. "How long was I there, Marcus? In my head, it feels like years. Like I lived a whole lifetime in that place." I checked my watch. From landing to takeoff, we'd been in Hilford for exactly 3 hours and 17 minutes. But the date was wrong. According to my watch, it was February 18th. We'd lost 3 days. 3 days that didn't exist. In a village that didn't exist, fighting something that shouldn't exist. And as we flew toward Fairbanks, toward safety and sanity, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd only scratched the surface of something much larger. The mayor had mentioned other villages, other seals. How many Hilfords were out there, hidden in the vast wilderness of Alaska, keeping ancient things trapped beneath the ice? How many had we just doomed by breaking the first seal? The debriefing was a nightmare. Tom and I were separated immediately upon landing in Fairbanks, whisked away to different rooms in the federal building. For 12 hours straight, I told the same story over and over to different people. State police, FBI, even some agencies I didn't recognize. They showed me satellite footage of the area where Hilford should have been. Nothing. Just unbroken wilderness, no sign there had ever been anything there. But our planes told a different story. Both aircraft showed signs of extreme temperature exposure, metal stress consistent with flying through conditions that shouldn't be survivable. Tom's engine, which he claimed had failed, was working perfectly, but showed wear patterns that suggested it had been running continuously for months, not hours. And then there was the matter of the 3 missing days. "Where were you between February 15th and February 18th? Agent Sarah Hendricks asked for the 5th time. She was FBI, part of something called the Anomalous Events Division, which I didn't even know existed. I told you, we were in Hilford for 3 hours. 3 hours that took 3 days. Time worked differently there." She leaned back in her chair, studying me. "Trooper Cole, you're asking us to believe you found a village that exists outside normal time, populated by people from 1952 who made a deal with something prehistoric. You understand how that sounds? I understand it sounds insane. That doesn't make it less true. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs, old ones, black and white, yellowed at the edges. They showed a group of settlers, dated 1952. I recognized some of the faces immediately. Mayor Thornton, Martha Daniels, others I'd seen in the town hall. We found these in the state archives, Hendricks said. The Hilford colony, 43 settlers who left Anchorage in January 1952, heading into the interior to establish a communal settlement. They were never seen again. Search parties found no trace of them. They made it, I said quietly. They built their town, and then they made their bargain. With what? I thought about that massive hand emerging from the permafrost, about the mayor's warning about things sleeping beneath Alaska. I don't know. Something old. Something that shouldn't exist. Hendricks was quiet for a moment, then pulled out another file. This one was marked classified in red letters that seemed to glow. Trooper Cole, what I'm about to show you doesn't leave this room. You're being read into a program that officially doesn't exist. Do you understand? I nodded. She opened the file, revealing a map of Alaska marked with red X's. There were dozens of them, scattered across the state. Every X marks a location where we've had reports similar to yours. Places that appear and disappear. Villages that shouldn't exist. People who vanish for days and return with stories about impossible places. How long has this been going on? The reports go back to the 1920s, when Bush pilots first started exploring the interior, but the indigenous peoples have stories that go back millennia, stories about places where the world is thin, where other realities bleed through. She pulled out a photograph, grainy and old. It showed another village, similar architecture to Hilford, but in a different setting, coastal rather than mountain valley. This is New Temperance, photographed in 1973 by a Coast Guard helicopter. When they went back the next day, it was gone. The pilot and crew were missing for a week. When they reappeared, they claimed they'd only been gone an hour. Another photograph, another village. Fort Isolation, 1987. A mining crew stumbled upon it, said the residents all spoke Russian and claimed it was still 1867, that the purchase of Alaska from Russia had never happened. 2 of the miners stayed behind. We never found them. Jesus, I breathed. How many are there? We've documented 17 confirmed cases. There are probably more. Alaska is vast, Trooper Cole. There are places here no human has ever been, places where the normal rules don't apply. And you just leave them alone? What else can we do? She leaned forward, intensity in her eyes. We've tried expeditions, military interventions, scientific studies. Everyone who spends too much time in these places either disappears or comes back changed. The best we can do is monitor, contain when possible, and keep the public from finding out. But Hilford is gone now. I destroyed it. Did you? She pulled out a tablet showing real-time satellite footage of the area. This was taken this morning. I looked at the screen and felt my blood turn to ice. There was something there. Not Hilford, but a depression in the ground, perfectly circular, about the size of the village. And it was growing, slowly, maybe a few inches per day, but definitely expanding. What is that? We don't know, but Thermal Hendricks pulled up another image. This is the thermal reading. The depression was cold. Not just winter in Alaska cold, but absolutely frigid, reading at near absolute zero. And there was something else. Movement beneath the surface, patterns that suggested something vast shifting in its sleep. The thing under Hilford, I whispered. It's waking up, which is why we need you to go back. I stared at her. Are you insane? There's nothing to go back to. Hilford is gone, but the other villages aren't. She spread out the map again. Mayor Thornton mentioned other villages, other seals. We need to find them, understand them, before whatever you released fully wakes up. I'm a state trooper, not a whatever this is. You're the only person who's been to one of these places and come back unchanged. Tom Reeves is different now. He functions, but he sees time differently. Sometimes he answers questions before they're asked. Sometimes he talks about things that haven't happened yet. But you're still you. That makes you valuable. I wanted to refuse. Every instinct told me to walk away, go back to my normal job, pretend none of this had happened. But I kept thinking about that hand emerging from the ground, about the mayor's desperate warning, about the thing sleeping beneath Alaska that was starting to wake up. What do you need me to do? Over the next 3 weeks, I was given a crash course in what Agent Hendricks called anomalous reconnaissance. I learned about temporal distortions, reality bubbles, and something called ontological resistance. Basically, the ability to maintain your sense of self when reality tries to rewrite you. Apparently, I had an unusually high resistance, which is why I'd been able to resist Hilford's influence. They partnered me with Dr. Marcus Webb, a theoretical physicist who specialized in what he called localized space-time anomalies. He was a small, nervous man who talked too fast and had a habit of scribbling equations on any available surface. But he was also brilliant, and possibly the only person who actually understood what we were dealing with. Think of reality as a frequency, he explained during one of our sessions. Most of the time, everything vibrates at the same frequency, so we all experience the same reality. But these villages, they're vibrating at different frequencies. They exist in the same space, but not the same phase of reality. So how do we find them? Interference patterns. He showed me a modified radio scanner that looked like something out of a sci-fi movie. When two different reality frequencies interact, they create interference, like feedback when you put two radios too close together. This device detects that interference. Our first mission was to investigate reports of strange activity near the village of Kaktovik on the Arctic coast. Hunters had reported seeing buildings that weren't there the next day, hearing voices speaking languages that didn't exist, finding footprints that aged decades in minutes. We flew in on a specially modified twin otter, equipped with enough sensing equipment to stock a university lab. As we approached the coordinates, Dr. Webb's interference detector started going crazy. "We're close," he said, adjusting dials with shaking hands. "The frequency displacement is off the charts." I looked out the window and saw it, another impossible village. This one built on ice that should have melted decades ago. The architecture was different from Hilford, more Nordic in style, with steep-roofed buildings clustered around what looked like a church. Smoke rose from chimneys, and I could see people moving in the streets. "There," I pointed, "on the ice shelf." "That's impossible," our pilot said. "That ice breaks up every summer. Nothing could be built there." "Unless it's not really there," Webb said. "Or rather, unless it's there in a different phase of reality where the ice never melts." We landed on the shore, about a half-mile from the village. This time, I was prepared. I wore a device Webb had created, something he called a temporal anchor, basically a sophisticated atomic clock that would keep me synchronized with our reality. Webb had one too, along with enough equipment to outfit a small expedition. As we approached the village, I felt the same wrongness I'd felt at Hilford, but stronger. The air seemed thicker, time seemed slower, and sounds didn't travel quite right. My temporal anchor was beeping steadily, like a metronome keeping me in rhythm with 2021. The first person we encountered was a young boy, maybe 12, dressed in sealskin clothes that looked handmade. He stared at us with curious eyes that held too much knowledge for a child. "Hello?" I said in English, then tried again in what little Inupiaq I knew. "We're looking for your village elder." The boy smiled, and when he spoke, it was in perfect, unaccented English. "Grandfather has been expecting you. He said the seal breakers would come. Follow me." Webb and I exchanged glances. Seal breakers. They knew about Hilford. The boy led us through streets that felt older than they looked. The buildings appeared new, well-maintained, but there was a weight to them, a sense of accumulated time that made my teeth ache. The villagers watched us pass with those same distant eyes I'd seen in Hilford, but there was something else there too. Resignation, maybe, or anticipation. The church at the center of the village was wrong in ways I couldn't immediately identify. It had too many angles, or not enough, and looking at it directly made my vision blur. The boy led us inside, where an elderly Inuit man sat in a chair that looked carved from a single piece of whalebone. "Grandfather," the boy said, "the seal breakers are here." The old man opened eyes that were ancient beyond his apparent years. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. "I am Tonrak," he said. "I have been Tonrak since 1847, when my people found the thing sleeping beneath the ice and built this village to keep it trapped. You destroyed Hilford." It wasn't a question. "It was an accident," I said. "We didn't know." "There are no accidents in places like this," Tonrak interrupted. "Only patterns completing themselves. The seals were always meant to be broken. We just hoped we would have more time." "How many villages are there?" Webb asked, his scientific curiosity overcoming his fear. "How many seals?" "7, Tonrak said simply. 7 villages built on 7 sleeping horrors. 7 bargains made to keep them contained. Hilford was the first seal. We are the second. And if all 7 are broken?" The old man was quiet for a long moment, then gestured to the walls of the church. For the first time, I noticed they were covered in carvings, intricate, disturbing images that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. They showed massive beings, things that dwarfed mountains, rising from the earth. They showed the sky cracking like glass, reality folding in on itself, humanity reduced to screaming specks. "The old ones return," Tonrak said simply. "The things that ruled before the earth was settled into its current form, before physics and biology and all your scientific laws were established. They've been sleeping, waiting for the universe to age enough for them to wake. The villages, the seals, they were stopgaps, delays, but nothing lasts forever." "There has to be a way to stop it," I insisted. "Perhaps." Tonrak stood, moving with difficulty. "Come, I will show you something." He led us beneath the church, down stairs that descended far deeper than they should. The walls changed from wood to ice to something that wasn't quite either. Finally, we emerged in a vast cavern, lit by a phosphorescent glow that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. In the center of the cavern was a pool of black water that reflected no light, and in that water, something moved. Something vast and serpentine, with scales that looked like sheets of ice and eyes that burned with cold fire. It was beautiful and terrible, and looking at it made every cell in my body scream to run. "The second sleeper," Tonrak said. "We call it the hunger of the void. It feeds on time itself, consuming past and future, leaving only an eternal frozen present. Our village exists in a bubble of consumed time, a moment stretched to infinity, to keep it sleeping." "How do we keep it asleep?" Webb asked, his scientific instruments going haywire. "You don't," Tonrak said sadly. "The seal is already weakening. When Hilford fell, the others felt it. The bargains are unraveling. We have perhaps a year, maybe 2, before all 7 seals fail." "Then what do we do?" The old man looked at me with those ancient eyes. "You prepare. You warn your people. You find a way to survive what's coming. Or you find a way to make new bargains, new seals. But the price... He shook his head. The price is always more than you think you can pay. Over the next 18 months, I became something I never expected. Not just a state trooper, but a guardian of reality. Dr. Webb and I traveled across Alaska, documenting the 7 SEAL villages, trying to understand the bargains that had been made, searching for a way to prevent the catastrophe that was coming. We found the 3rd SEAL in the Aleutian Islands, a fishing village called Forgotten Harbor, where the residents had been hauling in the same catch every day since 1901, feeding something beneath the waves that had too many teeth and sang songs that drove whales to beach themselves. The 4th SEAL was in the Brooks Range, a mining town called Perpetual Claim, where gold veins never ran dry because the miners were feeding the mountain their memories, their dreams, their very essence, one day at a time. The 5th was near Denali, a logging camp called Timber's End, where the trees grew back overnight and the lumberjacks aged backwards, getting younger with each swing of their axes until they became children, and then nothing at all. The 6th was harder to find. It existed only during the Aurora Borealis, a nomadic village of Yupik hunters who followed caribou herds that had been extinct for 1,000 years, keeping something trapped in the lights themselves. Each village was failing. The bargains were breaking down. The things they were keeping sealed were stirring, testing their prisons, preparing to wake. By January 2023, we still hadn't found the 7th SEAL, and time was running out. The depression where Hilford had been was now a mile wide and growing faster. Things were coming out of it, not fully formed, not yet, but shadows and suggestions of things that shouldn't exist. The military had cordoned off the area, but soldiers who got too close came back changed, speaking in languages that had never existed, their eyes reflecting too many dimensions. Tom Reeves, my pilot friend who'd started all this, had become something of a prophet. His temporal displacement, his ability to see multiple time streams, had evolved. He would show up at random times with warnings. Tuesday, he told me one morning, appearing in my office without warning. Tuesday at 3:17 p.m., don't be in Anchorage. The 5th SEAL breaks then, but not here. It breaks in the past, which changes the present. Anchorage will never have existed. He was right. On Tuesday at 3:17 p.m., Anchorage flickered. For about 30 seconds, it wasn't there. Then it was back, but different, smaller. Some buildings were missing. About 3,000 people who should have existed simply didn't. Reality had been edited, and only those of us who'd been exposed to the SEAL villages remembered the original version. Agent Hendricks called an emergency meeting. The FBI's Anomalous Events Division had expanded into a full task force, bringing in experts from around the world. But nothing we tried worked. Every attempt to reinforce the SEALs just made them fail faster. Every scientific solution broke down when faced with things that existed outside science. It was Tom who gave us our first real lead about the 7th SEAL. "It's not where," he said during one of his lucid moments. "It's when. The 7th SEAL isn't in a place, it's in a moment. A moment that keeps happening over and over, preventing the final awakening." "What moment?" I asked. "The moment you choose," he said, his eyes reflecting futures I couldn't see. "The moment that hasn't happened yet but already has. The moment where you decide if humanity survives or if everything ends." Dr. Webb had been working on a theory. The SEAL villages weren't just prisons, they were examples, showing us how to make bargains with things beyond our reality. Each village had traded something fundamental, time, memory, causality, to keep their monster contained. But what if, instead of 7 small bargains, we made one large one? "It's insane," Hendricks said when Webb presented his plan. "You're talking about sacrificing Alaska, the entire state." "Not sacrificing," Webb corrected. "Transforming. Alaska becomes the seal. The entire state exists in a temporal bubble, cut off from the rest of reality. The old ones stay trapped. The rest of the world stays safe." "And the 4 million people living in Alaska?" "They become like the villagers, existing outside normal time, living the same years over and over, never aging, never dying, never changing." It was monstrous. It was impossible. It was the only plan we had. But to make it work, we needed to find the seventh seal, the moment Tom had talked about, the choice that hadn't been made yet. March 15th, 2023, 2 years to the day since I'd first found Hilford. I was flying alone, searching the remote wilderness for any sign of the seventh village. My instruments were going crazy, detecting temporal anomalies everywhere. Alaska was coming apart at the seams, reality fracturing like ice in spring. That's when I saw it. Not a village, but a single building, a small cabin sitting on a frozen lake that shouldn't exist. I'd flown over this area 100 times, and there had never been a lake here. But here it was, and in the center, that impossible cabin. I landed on the ice, which creaked ominously under the plane's weight. The cabin looked familiar, though I was sure I'd never seen it before. As I approached, the door opened. I walked out. Not me, but another me. Older, scarred, wearing a uniform I didn't recognize. He smiled sadly. "You found it," he said. "The seventh seal. The moment of choice." "I don't understand." "You will. Come inside." The cabin's interior was bigger than its exterior, an impossibility I'd gotten used to. Inside were dozens of versions of me, some older, some younger, some barely recognizable as human anymore. All the possibilities of who I could become, would become, had become. "This is the seventh seal," the older me explained. "Not a village, but a moment. This moment. Every version of you from every possible timeline converges here at this choice point. As long as we keep meeting here, keep not making the choice, the loop continues. The seventh seal holds." "What choice?" He gestured to a table in the center of the room. On it were 2 items, a key and a gun. "The key opens all the seals permanently, releases the old ones, ends the world as we know it, but starts something new, something unimaginable. Humanity transforms, evolves, becomes something that can coexist with the old ones. And the gun? Kills you, all of you, every version across every timeline. Your death creates a paradox that collapses Alaska into a permanent temporal prison. The old ones stay trapped, the world stays safe, but Alaska and everyone in it becomes like the seal villages, forever frozen, forever looping." I looked around at all my other selves. Some were reaching for the key, others for the gun. None had chosen yet. That was the seal, the eternal moment of indecision. "How long have we been here?" I asked. "Always," another version of me answered. "We've always been here, at this moment. We will always be here. Unless I choose. Unless you choose." I thought about everything I'd seen. The villages trapped in time. The people living the same days over and over. The things sleeping beneath Alaska. Vast and terrible and incomprehensible. I thought about Tom Reeves, unstuck in time. About Agent Hendricks and her task force. About the 4 million people living in Alaska who had no idea their reality was about to end. I thought about the mayor of Hilford, warning me about the other seals. About Tonrak, showing me the hunger of the void. About all the bargains made to keep the world safe from things it couldn't understand. There's a third option, I said suddenly. All my other selves turned to look at me. What if we don't choose? What if we keep the moment going forever? That is the seal, the older me said. But it's failing. The indecision can't last. Eventually, one of us will choose. Not if we make a bargain. The room fell silent. All versions of me leaned in. The old ones want to wake up. Reality wants us to choose. Fine. We bargain. We give them both what they want, but on our terms. The old ones get to wake up, but only in Alaska. Reality gets its choice, but the choice is to keep choosing forever. Alaska becomes not a prison, but a border, a place where both realities can exist. The old ones rule here. Humanity rules everywhere else, and we stand at the boundary, forever choosing, forever maintaining the balance. My other selves looked at each other, considering. Some nodded, some shook their heads, but gradually they all began to move. Not toward the key or the gun, but toward the walls of the cabin. Each version of me took a position, forming a circle, a human seal made of all my possibilities. We become the seventh seal, I said, understanding flooding through me. Not a village, but a person. A person who exists in all timelines simultaneously, forever choosing, forever maintaining the boundary. The older me smiled. You understand. But are you willing to pay the price? To exist forever in this moment, never moving forward, never moving back? To be the eternal guardian? I thought about my life. 32 years as a state trooper. No family, few friends, just the job and the endless Alaskan wilderness. Maybe I'd always been heading toward this moment. Maybe this was always my purpose. Yes, I said. The moment I spoke, everything changed. The cabin exploded outward, but instead of destruction, it became expansion. I could feel myself stretching across time, existing in every moment simultaneously. I was in Hilford, watching it form. I was in the future, seeing what Alaska would become. I was everywhere and every when. A consciousness spread across the timeline like butter across bread. Alaska transformed. Not all at once, but slowly, inevitably. The cities remained, but they became like the villages, places where time worked differently. Anchorage existed in all its iterations simultaneously. Fairbanks became a crossroads between realities. The wilderness became truly wild, inhabited by things that shouldn't exist, but did. The old ones woke, but contained. They ruled their domain, Alaska, but could not leave. The boundary held, maintained by my eternal choice, my endless moment of decision. Agent Hendricks and her task force adapted, became the interface between the two realities. They helped people who wanted to leave Alaska get out before the transformation was complete. They helped others, those who chose to stay, adapt to their new reality. Tom Reeves became my prophet, moving between timelines, carrying messages from all my selves to the world. He was the only one who could truly understand what I'd become. Dr. Webb documented everything, creating a guide for surviving in the new Alaska. His final report, before he left for the lower 48, read simply, "The experiment was a success. Reality has been preserved, at a cost. Alaska is no longer entirely our world, but it's not entirely theirs either. It's something new, something impossible, something necessary. And me? I exist in the cabin that exists everywhere and nowhere. I am the seventh seal, the eternal moment of choice. Every second I choose to maintain the boundary. Every second I could choose to end it all. But I don't. I hold the line, because that's what I've always done. I'm Trooper Marcus Cole, and I protect and serve. Even if what I'm protecting humanity from is the fundamental nature of reality itself. Even if serving means existing forever in a single moment, watching all possibilities but choosing none. Alaska is where people go to disappear. I disappeared into Alaska itself, became part of its bones, its breath, its impossible existence. The state that shouldn't be, guarded by the trooper who exists in all times, containing the things that wait beneath the ice. The villages that shouldn't exist still exist, but now they're just part of Alaska's new normal. Hilford reformed but different. The other seals hold but loosely, allowing controlled leaks between realities. Tour guides in Anchorage now warn visitors, don't go into the wilderness unless you're prepared to see things that can't exist. Don't stay too long or you might become like them. And if you see a state trooper who looks like he's everywhere at once, wave. He's the reason the rest of the world is still sane. But sanity is relative. Reality is negotiable. And in Alaska, in the last frontier, all things are possible. Even the impossible. Especially the impossible. End recording. This account was found on a laptop in an abandoned state trooper station in Fairbanks, Alaska, dated March 15, 2023. The station had been closed for renovations, but when workers arrived, they found it filled with thousands of identical laptops, all displaying the same document, all dated differently, some from the past, some from futures that haven't happened yet. Alaska State Troopers have no record of a Trooper Marcus Cole. They also have no record of not having a record of Trooper Marcus Cole. In Alaska, both things are true. If you travel to Alaska and experience temporal displacement, reality fluctuations, or encounter villages that shouldn't exist, do not be alarmed. This is normal now. Alaska has become the boundary between what is and what shouldn't be. The seventh seal holds. The choice continues forever.